Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
Sometimes me and my co-host could record entire episodes without ever opening our mouths, because this week it's The Shining from 1980, directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson. I actually decided to pick this one this week because randomly on my YouTube algorithm, for whatever reason, it threw up the old Mel Gibson tapes where he's just screaming down the phone at his wife, and it just transported me back to that scene in The Shining where Jack Nicholson's chasing Wendy up the stairs backwards as he's just yelling at her and screaming at her. And it's funny because it got me thinking about what an iconic film this is. And Stanley Kubrick, one of my favourite directors ever, probably my favourite director, edged out maybe by Sergio Leone only. And the thing about him is that he's kind of frustrating for me because as his career went on, he became more and more selective, bigger, longer gaps in between each film. And I do kind of think if he'd been more of a Hitchcock where he's just like, I'm going to pump out a film every year, 2 years, they still would have been amazing. But The Shining, there's something about it where it's just perfect. Stanley Kubrick actually got less flashy, to an extent less variety to his cinematography as he went on, but everything about, the framing, it's very straight. Everything's in straight lines. If the camera does move, it's in a straight line directly towards, or a simple zoom into the subject or the actor. Everything's very simple. Everything's very understated. A lot of the time he'll focus on conversations or parts of conversations or things that don't even really seem to matter. Not necessary to the plot, not particularly interesting. A lot of time it's the boring bits, but it's this weird way all the pieces combined create something wholly different.
I'm outlining a new writing project, and 5 months of peace is just what I want.
Rewatching the film for this review, it's actually got two of my favourite shots. The tracking shot from behind the bike when he's going along, and when he's trapped in the fridge, the camera's below him, and he's like, let me out. Like, I just love those shots, and I think it's genius. What I really got to pick up as well, like, said everything's perfect. The set, like the Overlook Hotel, iconic in itself. The carpet, the way it looks, the maze, everything was perfect. I'm going to ask you, as a big fan of Stanley Kubrick, where do you think The Shining ranks?
I think first of all you kind of need to split up his catalogue of films into two halves, and there's before 2001 A Space Odyssey and after. In terms of the after 2001 A Space Odyssey, it's probably in the top 3. In personal favouritism, I put it after 2001 and A Clockwork Orange.
Oh, really?
I probably actually controversially for a lot of people put it above Full Metal Jacket.
I would agree with putting it above Full Metal Jacket, but I would struggle putting it above A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Orange for me is my favourite Kubrick film. It's just everything. The look, the way they talk, whatever that gibble-gabble language is, that's my favourite Kubrick
There's not
film.
one element of it that feels like it's borrowed from something else.
No, you're right. And Full Metal Jacket, I would put that below The Shining as well. So we're in agreement there.
One thing about Kubrick is he's always had a knack for being timeless. He generally uses classical music. Classical music is the suit and tie of music. It never gets old, never goes out of fashion. His themes and his ideas and his stylistic choices, the class he brings to the technical level of production, his sci-fi epic 2001 A Space Odyssey, even from a technical level, it basically holds up. The guys in monkey suits looks a bit ropey and silly. But other than that, basically everything looks at times even better than some of the sci-fi stuff coming out today. Really incredible. Which is why it's surprising in the opening sequence, you've got these beautiful sweeping shots over the landscape as the little Volkswagen Beetle drives to the Overlook, and you got that beautiful haunting creepy music. It's definitely got some sort of synthesizer running through it, but nothing that makes it feel dated in a bad way. But then the title credit are they look like something out of fucking clip art or something. They look awful. Those like the rolling text of like brightly lit text. It just looks awful.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, Declan, if that's what you got to pick out as what's being awful, the title credits, then it's a sign of a good film. Like I'd rather the title credits be awful than we'd be like, did you see that acting performance by fucking Jack Nicholson? It's fucking rotten.
But the title's ruined it.
Yeah.
And you're right, but the reason I bring it up is because, like I said, he is the ultimate perfectionist. He's the guy that made Scatman Crothers break down and cry because he got so many takes without really giving any direction. We spoke before in our previous episodes about Kubrick. He was a guy who, as much as he's seen as this all-controlling figure, he was actually more of a taste tester. He liked to film and film and film and let people improvise until he saw what he wanted. Didn't necessarily know what he wanted, but he know what he didn't want. And he'd know what he wants once he saw it. And this would drive some people crazy. His manipulative tactics and psychological warfare with Shelley Duvall literally may have tipped her over the edge and permanently altered the course of her life, as she went kind of crazy after this, and she always attributed The Shining and her time working on it as an awful time for her mental health. He was known for getting 80, 90 takes of just walking into a room because he was waiting for something interesting to emerge. His technical level and precision, he was always far ahead of everyone else with technology. The Steadicam was not brand new, but it was innovative use of it on this film as we track people going through corridors and, Danny riding his little bike through different corridors and stuff. He was always so on the pulse of knowing what was right and what wasn't.
If you're picking up the title credits as the only thing that's slightly out of kilter, this is a very good film. Do you know what I mean? But I'm trying to get into his head, and I don't really want to get into Kubrick's head because I'll probably go insane. But it's like, I never realised he'd done that method of not really knowing what he wanted and just waiting and waiting. I find that quite surreal for someone who's a perfectionist, because normally they'd be like so organised and be like, I want it exactly like this. So he's kind of like double negatives in the way he works. I'm such a perfectionist, but I'm not sure what I want until I see it.
I picture it sometimes like organising a wedding.
Yeah.
From the girl's point of view, not from the guy, where it's a lot of smile and nod
idea.
and, sounds good, hands in pockets, walking around. I mean, from the sense of you get shown things. You might say, I want a classical this, but you're not designing a fucking wedding dress and the venue yourself. You're being shown different things, you've been shown different venues, and then within the venue, you've been shown different options and shown different foods, and you get to taste some of the different foods, and ultimately, you arrive at what you want, but it's out of a course of knowing it when you see it. So, it's actually probably a much more organic and better way of making a film. But the problem with it is that it takes an awful long time. And part of the reason why Kubrick's productions, in terms of vision and scope for the story, would get smaller and smaller. He would have a big budget, but that budget would go on purely the length of production. So he could have this long, organic process. Like with Eyes Wide Shut, is still the longest continuous shoot of all time. 2 years. He got longer and longer as he went on. Scope of the film's not very big. He walks around a few streets, he's in a few parties, and he's in a few apartments, but the budget was pretty big because of just the length of production. It's just a manner of working that no one really wants to participate in, and certainly not studios don't want to fund it because it might just be a big waste of time. Actors don't want to be locked in for that length of time, so it's just never going to happen again. Let me ask you, what do you think of Jack Torrance when we first are introduced to him?
I didn't really like him. I'm going back to the interview scene where he comes in, strolls into the Overlook, sits in the chair. He had a very much air of like an arrogant man to me. What you're doing is doing the heating so the elements can't take control. Easy, we'll love it here. I felt something a bit off about him, but it's good screen presence by Jack Nicholson because I was unnerved more or less straight away when I saw him. It's the whole look, the strandy hair and the, Jack Nicholson, that's why he's perfect to play the Joker. He just has a crazy face.
He's brilliant though as well because, the guy that wants to be a tough guy who is putting on the bravado, that he wants to be tough, wants to appear to be tough. And then there's the really tough guy who's trying to be normal. It's like the Incredible Hulk trying to be Bruce Banner. He's trying to keep it in. And that is what Jack Torrance is for me in the opening scenes. He's smiling too much. He's trying to keep it together. He's trying to be the picture perfect postcard dad. When he sees the bedroom, he's like,
Perfect for a child.
Yeah.
Yes.
it's nearly like a reptilian alien has come to Earth pretending to be a human, and they're trying to say things they think a human would say in that situation.
Yeah.
He's forcing that normalcy, that sense of being like the nice, happy dad. But you can see when they're driving in and he's talking about people getting stranded and eating each other, and Wendy's like, oh, don't say that around Danny. And he's like, don't worry, you learn about it in school.
Yeah,
and he already looks crazy.
He saw it on the TV. He's just like looking out the window
He already looks fucking nuts, and he's trying to keep it down. Because realistically, in the book, he's kind of not crazy so much. He's a drinker, but he doesn't have that already about to lose it vibe to him. But it sold it better for me in the film, the fact that It didn't feel like it came out of nowhere.
Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. You saw it on the television.
And Danny's just an annoying little bitch. Like, I don't care what anyone says. What's his fucking imaginary friend called?
Tony.
Yeah. That was just getting on my fucking nuts. Like, gonna get a phone call. And I was like, this is just bare weird.
So why don't you like Tony, though? Why don't you? Was it the acting the kid does?
No. The acting's very good. The voice is very unnerving as well. I think I like the differential between when Tony comes. I like when you hear the voice, you know it's Tony. I like that. The kid just had a very annoying look, like with the bowl haircut and the dungarees.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
We find out he has like his weird little fits, doesn't he, Declan? Then the doctor comes around and we hear more about Jack, and it's specifically the incident with his papers where he pulls Danny and dislocates his shoulder, and you know the wife is trying to play it off by going, oh, he just didn't mean to do it, and then
a momentary act of muscular discoordination or whatever he describes it as.
And then like this is very, very good character building because your mind flashes back to the interview. You've only seen him on screen a couple of times, so seen him at the hotel, like make the call to say he's got a job. There's something bad about this guy. I can feel it. So
there's something bad about the hotel as well.
Yeah.
Part of what you were talking about, Tony. In the book, it expands on Tony a lot, and Tony is, of course, some sort of entity, either a ghost or a spiritual being, and he's able to communicate with Danny. Because, like we find out from Scatman Crothers, he has the shine.
What a name.
Scatman, that's his real name.
Scatman.
That's what his grandma used to call this telepathic ability that very few people seem to have.
My grandmother and I could hold conversations entirely without ever opening our mouths. She called it shining.
And he instantly recognizes in Danny, in that brilliant, do you want some ice cream, Doc? Moment.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doctor?
I love that scene.
In the book, though, it expands on it a lot. And there's not just Tony. Tony's the main one who seemingly, I guess, just comes across Danny and links onto him and starts communicating with him and sort of being a guardian angel. But there's also other beings who are sometimes there that Danny doesn't like. Some are menacing and some are malevolent, some are evil. And Tony tends to keep them at bay. And as the book goes on, Tony eventually isn't able to communicate with Danny anymore because they're keeping him away from him because they're actually scared of the Overlook Hotel themselves.
Tony, I'm scared. Remember what Mr. Hallorann said. It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
There's nearly two supernatural concurrent plot lines going on. There's Danny and this ability to shine and have telepathic ability to connect with other people, but also sense things otherworldly and sense things about the supernatural. And then you have the Overlook Hotel, which is a hub for supernatural activity, and they cross paths, and that's why things blow up.
He gets told in the interview that the previous caretaker has murdered his wife and kids, and then he doesn't seem fazed by it. I'll be like, imagine if I went to get a job, I went to get a job and they were like, oh, you was really great in the interview, but someone got murdered in that chair like 3 days ago. Mass murder. I'd be like, nah, fuck this, man.
Thing is, though, it was like 30 years ago.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
And even then, you don't automatically go, well, there's probably ghosts, do you? You're like,
what
that's
about,
fucked up.
What about, Declan, if you went to buy a new house, and 30 years ago, they were like, 30 years ago, in this very house, we'll knock 10 grand off you, but we got to tell you, not an Indian burial ground, but 30 years ago, there was a mass murder here. Would you take it?
Probably, yeah. If they knocked off the price a bit, then definitely, yeah. See, I'm quite, like, it's not even in a not scared way, because I actually do get quite stupidly scared of ghosts and shit, but I honestly think if a ghost was haunting me, unless they were doing poltergeist chairs spinning around shit, I wouldn't even notice. I'm so unobservant. I just don't notice things happening.
I think his family is a secondary thought. He wants to literally go to the Overlook to get peace and quiet to finish his writing. That's his main reason for going.
Well, you're right there, actually, because I did, especially when I was watching it this time. We know, like, Stephen King always puts himself into the main character. He's always an alcoholic. Half the time they're a writer. Like, it's kind of ridiculous at a certain point. It's that thing of marrying someone and you don't really like them. You're kind of fucking drawn apart of them, but you're stuck with them. You start hating them. You start to resent them. And he's got this higher calling that he thinks he has anyway. He wants to be a writer. He wants to write some great book. You know, he wants to live by his wits, as they describe it in the book. Probably partly the reason why he can't do it is the fact that he's got this family and other responsibilities and other things. But people with less free time than him have written incredible, amazing pieces of work or created beautiful pieces of art. But his frustration naturally boils over, and rather than going inwards at himself, usually ends up lashing out at those around him.
Wendy, let me explain something to you. Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. Understand?
Yeah.
Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
And you can see that part of this hatred for Wendy he has and resentment is that he probably holds her responsible for the fact that he hasn't been able to get his writing career off the ground. Because we see later on, as they're in the Overlook and they're working there, just a month in, she comes in just to, disturb him writing, but just like, how you getting on?
Do you want a sandwich?
I'll make you some food. Like, what are you doing? He's livid with her. He's like, you're breaking my fucking attention. What do you want me to do about the weather?
Yeah.
When you start by, get the fuck out of here. Right
if you
now.
hear this typing noise, don't come in. But imagine, Declan, if you're trying to write a book, and you got that little fucking dickhead running around on a bike just going, red rum. How annoying was that, Pete?
Well, you say that, but he's not writing his book because, why he's riding around that, he's banging the ball against the wall and distracting himself. Yeah. But the thing is, there's an interesting thing with sound in this film as well, because you start to notice early on, there's this thing with like this pulsating, repetitive beat. That eventually dominates the soundtrack. But early on, you see snippets of it in the diegetic sound within the actual scenes, because you have Danny, when he's riding along the corridors, he rides over the wood, and then he rides over the carpet. It's a very specific, deliberate changes in sound. And then we move on later and we see Jack banging the ball against the wall as we pull out from the typewriter. And it's quicker paced together beats, but it's that same sort of thing. And this starts to mirror throughout the movie, on and on in so many ways. The radio guy is trying to contact them later on when Jack Torrance breaks the radio. You hear the repetitive soundtrack of the dung dung beat. But the heartbeat, but you also hear the repetitive message of them calling in.
KK1 calling KK12. Do you read me? This is KK1 calling KK12. KK1 calling KK12. Are you receiving me?
And you might say, okay, yeah, but that's how radio people call in. Of course they're going to do it. But there's too many examples where it's the exact same over and over again. You see Scatman Crothers' character, when he finally comes in at the end, before he gets whacked in the chest with an axe, he's repeating the same line over and over.
Hello? Anybody here? Hello? Anybody here? Hello? Anybody here?
Is anyone here?
Is anyone here? Mr. Torrance?
Hello?
Mrs. Torrance? Yeah. Over and over in the exact same way, to the point where it's clearly deliberate. It's too repetitive, too exactly the same. And he's just wandering. I think it relates to the fact that the part of the story seems to be about a vicious cycle. In the book, it goes into it more when Jack Torrance's dad was an alcoholic, beat him when he was a kid, and that transferred it to him, and he's worried he's going to transfer it to Danny. And if you've ever seen the sequel or read the book sequel, that is what happens. Danny grows up to become an alcoholic. Jack Torrance, as he starts to interact with the various spirits and ghost entities within the hotel, they keep telling him that you've always been the caretaker, or hinting at the fact that you've always been there.
You've always been the caretaker.
I should know, sir. I've always been here.
So there's this weird thing where I really think, and it's the first time I've realised it, or at least got the theory of it, but I really think that pulsing nature of the soundtrack and repetitive nature of diegetic sounds within the movie is really intentional, and I think that's a deliberate point of just making it feel like that repetitive motion, like you're constantly in a circle that you can't get out of, kind of like the maze at the end that you just can't get out of throughout the whole story.
On to Stephen King now. I think he must be one of the authors with the most work adapted to film. Some duds, yeah. We saw The Bogeyman, which I didn't really rate that highly. It was okay, I guess. Pet Sematary, we won't talk about that.
Why not? I love the original.
The original was good. The remake was awful.
Fair enough.
It Part 1 was very good, I thought. I thought that was fantastic. It Part 2...
awful.
I didn't like.
Original miniseries, brilliant as well. Well, again, the first part was better though.
You know, you're a big, huge fan of The Stand, the TV series. So he literally churns out book after book that is made into film. Would you say that this is probably, in your eyes, the best adaptation of his work there is?
Yes and no. It depends what you mean by adaptation, and if you mean adaptation the way Stephen King likes to view it in terms of how he'd like his work to be adapted, one of the worst, because the spirit of the film is in there. Everything that's changed, there's sort of an element that remains, but in a totally different form. So I can see why he'd be livid.
And there are an awful lot of things about that movie that I think are flawless and beautiful and just marvelous. And then there are other times when I feel as though I'd given Stanley Kubrick a live grenade and he heroically threw his body on it.
It's even to the point where he must have thought, Stanley Kubrick's just changing things to fuck with me at this point. Because, you know, in the book, he has a croquet mallet instead of an axe. Like, there's even little things like that seem insubsequential. You know, there's no maze in the book. It's hedge animal sculptures. And they play into it in a similar way to how the maze does. But it's just, you know, everything's similar but different. You know, they escape and Jack freezes to death at the end of the film. In the book, the Overlook Hotel explodes because of the furnace and he burns to death. You know, it's nearly like everything's the polar opposite. In terms of just taking a book and making an incredible movie out of it, having your own interpretation of it, if you think of an adaptation that way, then it's easily one of the best adaptations ever, because it actually interprets the spirit of the source material and creates something kind of new but still in keeping with it, but suits the medium. Because the thing with films is, if you're doing a true adaptation of a book, scene for scene, page for page, you're going to end up with hours of voiceover and like you're going to have to make it a 20-hour movie, even for an average sized book. For The Shining, you probably make a 30-hour movie because it's a different medium. You're working within a different scope. It's also a visual medium. You're taking elements of what you're describing in 30, 40 pages with tons of words and internal dialogue, and you're trying to convey that in maybe a 5-second shot. You have to interpret it in a different way. Sometimes it's wrong to be too true to the source material.
Is there any bits in the book that they have removed the film that you think is to the detriment of understanding the story? Because I feel like you're saying all this stuff and it is filling in gaps for me, and I feel like some of this stuff could have been in the film.
See, on paper, yes. In terms of, you know, the book really expands on it in a way that is just fun and you are missing out in the film. You could have got into it in some ways, like maybe Tony could have suggested in some of his dialogue the idea that there was other spirits that were trying to inhabit with Danny at the same time. You know, there's things you could have done. Scatman Crothers has a lot more flashback scenes in the book about his time at the Overlook and some of the creepy shit he's seen and how he's been freaked out by it. You know, there's a brilliant scene where Jack Torrance, he's listening to the radio as he works, and the radio gradually changes to his dad's voice and then to a screaming voice, and he you know, all these great set pieces. But ultimately, there's a certain atmosphere and tone and experience you're going for with a horror film. You can have a 3-hour epic like Dances with Wolves because you're entertaining the person and showing them a story. It's okay if they're kind of bored at a certain moment because something's about to come or you're building the seeds for something else. It's a different sort of experience. Horror film, you have to be dialed in. It's not about the plot. It's about the atmosphere and it's about the feeling it's creating in you. You could stop watching Dances with Wolves for half an hour to go to have a shower and come back and still more or less enjoy it. You got to be dialed into a horror film. You can't come in halfway through because the scary bits are meant to be happening in the second half, because the scary bits don't really mean anything unless you've had that preamble of the first half. And for that reason, like you have to be more ruthless with cutting stuff out.
Daddy. Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Daddy. Forever and ever and ever.
Well, with a book, you're making the scene yourself. You're like, what does the Overlook Hotel look like? It might describe it, and it might say the carpets are patterns. You don't have to do that with a film. It's already there. So you're right, the atmosphere is what you're creating. The visual stuff's there. We get to one of the most famous scenes. Talk about Room 237. Now, there's loads and loads of theories about Room 237 in Declan. Seems to be like the craziest, dodgiest room of the hotel. What made me laugh before I go into that is, you know, later on when he's like chasing them, they go back to the room he already knows they're in. And I'm like, why didn't you go to like the 100 and 200 other empty rooms?
Great point, but she, as far as she knew, he was locked inside the food storage place.
That's a good point.
Unable to escape.
But still, if there's a geezer running around with an axe, I'll be like, let me go to a room where he might not know I am. Like, because imagine, he'd have to go to like every single room. Anyway, so Room 237. You know the guy murdered his wife and children there 30 years ago. The only thing that I can take is I think the murdering might have taken place in 237, and that is where the supernatural activity all comes from. It draws people to there to commit heinous acts. It brings Danny in, like, you know, with the two twins and stuff, you know, the famous two twins. Come and play with us, Danny. Those are spirits generated by Room 237.
And they seem to get frozen in time and then remain there forever to like repeat themselves through the vessel of new living people that come into the hotel in various ways. And it's fucking great because as shit really starts to go down, Danny has his moment where he witnesses the twin girls. And it's clever because we've had enough shots of him riding without anything happening for it to become a bit of a shock the first time. And just the simple way in which you see them there and then it flashes to them killed in the corridor. Danny's acting's okay. It's not that good. It kind of is the weakest thing in the film for me at times. Yeah. But just the way the scene's arranged, the music, the haunting sound of the voice of the girls, it's just fucking creepy as shit, man. As we start to get into the scary moments, Kubrick's directing really starts to come to the front. We really start to see him have fun with how he manipulates the audience with his subtle little choices of camera movement or framing. You know, there's the moment where Danny comes across Room 237 later and the door's open and he wanders in, but we don't see what happened. And at the same time, Jack Torrance starts having his nightmare and he's screaming out. And Wendy runs in to see what's wrong, wakes him up, and he's saying, oh, I had a horrible nightmare. I was killing you and Danny and I was chopping you up into little pieces. And he's saying, like, I didn't like it. I don't want to do that. But you can see on Wendy's face, it's the first time where she's actually starting to think like, oh my God, like, is my husband really losing the plot here? Like, what's going on? And then it cuts straight to that slow, steady cam shot from far away with Danny in the forefront with his back to the camera as he's slowly, really slowly, deliberately so slowly walking towards him. And then eventually, obviously, Wendy discovers that he's been beaten and accuses Jack. But just the choice of their shots and the way it's put together and being behind Danny and the music coming in. I was watching this film again this morning in broad daylight with the windows open, and I was still like getting chills at those sort of moments.
It's everything. Again, like what you said about the scenes in the corridors, the crescendo, the build-up. Obviously, it starts off as a really beautiful naked woman. You're thinking something's going to happen. You know something's going to happen. You know, she starts melting in the bathtub, and then the woman's whole skin starts dripping off. It's just very fucked up. Like very horrible in a
it's
way.
Gross as well because you think like he was just getting off with that mutated old woman because obviously she looked like that the whole time. And it's an interesting choice because as the music kicks in and Jack's backing out and her laugh is mixing in with the music and she's kind of like walking after him like a zombie, it cuts back to flashes of her getting out of the bathtub and her wandering towards Jack to really hammer home the fact that he was just getting off with this mutated zombie woman. And it's just disgusting, but it's something about the whole way it builds up. And you got to say, like, when you think of the recipe for what makes this film brilliant, not even scary, just compelling.
Yeah.
You know, obviously there's obvious things like there's the music, there's the choices of shot, but the choices of shot are quite hard to pin down why they're so perfect, because if you describe them, you know, it's a stationary shot framed at like here high, whatever. Can't really describe why it's perfect, but it is. Something about it's subtle. But another thing is obviously Jack Nicholson's performance. But if you break down his performance into pieces, his fucking expressions in this film are just some of the best that have ever been put to film. There's moments where an entire scene, in the sense that you're in one location for one time period, is just a single shot of him looking weirdly like into the distance. And like you can't write that in a script. It's very cinematic. Again, no part of that was adapted directly like from the book. Like this is the chapter when Jack stares out a window for 5 minutes. As an isolated piece, you might watch it and just start cracking up. But as a part of this overall collective film and the way Kubrick pieces it together, it's magnificent. And there's this thing where he's looking at this woman with this creepy, deranged lust. And then the moment when he realizes it's what it really is.
Mate, to be fair, like it's all a downfall into insanity, both physical and mental. Having suffered from depression before, it starts off mental, and then once the depression takes hold, it ruins your body. You pick up more illnesses because you're mentally not fit. And all this ties in, like those facial expressions. It's easy for the human nature to pick up visual cues, body language. Say I went to a restaurant or something. You'll clock straight away in your peripheral vision. Oh, that guy is acting weird. Like, look at what he's doing. Like, his face, like, moving around all erratic. And that really helps us to understand, to get into his psyche.
It's interesting because body language, even in you as a person, like, obviously evolution's designed not to help the individuals, to help the species continue. And part of that is actually, there's things you have evolved to do yourself that actually betray you. In the sense that body language is designed in a way where it signals to other people, stay away. So it might actually be betraying you as an individual, but it's helping the species because it's letting everyone know, this guy's a stud, you can trust him, go mate with him, or stay away from this fucking psycho, he's a pussy that will give you shit children. Or he might just go psycho and kill everyone. So like you say, his way to get into those mannerisms, which really, like, any decent actor can pretend to cry or do this or put on an accent, but purely through subtle expressions, conveying so much is so amazing. We talked about earlier how part of what I think the story is anyway is he's a writer and he resents his wife. But also in this moment, it's nearly like symbolic of the whole idea of that thing with marriage where he's drawn in by this beautiful woman, and then the moment she has him under her spell, it's revealed that she's actually this hideous carcass. And from that moment onwards, he's really 100% against Wendy, even lying to her, protecting the hotel over her. He's more invested now in the hotel than her. Still seems to love Danny, but hates Wendy. She is the enemy.
Well, yeah, he goes back to Wendy, and Wendy asks, did you see anything? And he just flat out goes, saw nothing.
Starts gaslighting her.
Yeah, starts gaslighting her. Who do we think, is it ever explained who the woman entity is? Or is it just a random...
I think maybe she was Grady's wife, but I'm not sure, actually. Right. I think she might have just been... Because a lot of these spirits, they're not all... They're from over the years. They're not all connected directly. They're not all like from the same eras. Just like Jack Torrance will now become a permanent spiritual fixture within the hotel, or has he always been there, like Grady suggests later? I don't really know, to be honest. And it's one of those things where sometimes you don't want the answers to stuff. It's nearly more interesting because you can think about it.
Well, it would fit my theory of 237 if it was actually Grady's wife that hanging around there. So I'm going to say it is, but there you go. Yeah, he starts back in the hotel and he puts more emphasis on fulfilling his duties that he's contracted to do instead of Danny's going insane and Wendy wants to take him to the doctors, doesn't he? And he's saying, well, I've got a duty to the hotel. Like, are you worried about me? Like, you're right. You see the switch of not caring about his family. Throughout this whole film, we've had several references of him having problems with alcohol, but him being dry for 5 months. The reason him being dry, Declan, is the famous incident where he drags Danny and dislocates his shoulder. He swears to Wendy, if I ever drink again, you can go ahead and leave me. He finds the bar, there's no one there. And we've seen it before in the film when there's been no one there. They even talk about it at the start. And there's the famous barman.
I like you, Lloyd.
Yeah, I like you, Lloyd. He's take my money, just give me scotch and the rocks. And he starts talking to this barman. Instantly recognised the actor. I was like, it's Dr. Tyrell from Blade Runner. I had to Google that. I was like, I'm racking my brains. He's got some very iconic roles and not a lot of screen time in those 2 roles. you know, and he starts drinking and he tells the barman about the whole story about, well, I did touch him, but it was an accident, you know, and then we really see him start to like release his true self. And to me, that's a tie-in to Stephen King, I think, you know, the evils of what happens to him when the alcohol takes over him.
It's one of those things where you can get in all deep like we are, but just surface level, if you don't do any of that, it's still one of just phenomenal dialogue and delivery and exchange. And again, you have that moment where it's a very specific framing of a side shot as he walks over to the bar, says he'd sell his soul for one drink, and then it cuts straight to that very box framed stationary shot from behind the bar looking at Jack Torrance as he looks up and sees Lloyd. And interestingly, again, keeps hinting at this thing that he's been here before and he's in a cycle. As he starts to interact with the ghosts, he's not just meeting ghosts and being like, hello, Mr. Ghost. He's saying, hey, Lloyd. He's catching up with people.
My goddamn soul. Just a glass of beer.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Torrance.
Later on, where he walks into a fully in-swing dinner party with loads of guests, bumps into Mr. Grady, who we now meet, gets the avocado on his jacket. As they're heading to the toilets, he talks about, he was planning to change into his dinner jacket before a certain course was going to be served. So it's like he's getting fed not just this knowledge, but it's like he's nearly waking up to memories that maybe have been implanted, but maybe he's always had a certain spiritual track to being towards the Overlook Hotel, and this is just awakening things within him.
And this is where Grady tells him, no, you're the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker.
Do you recognise this actor?
I do recognise him, but I don't know where he's from.
So he's another Kubrick favourite. He was the dad in A Clockwork Orange.
Oh, yeah. No, didn't realise that.
Very different roles as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and then obviously back at the bar in the swing seat, it's kind of weird because you're working it out. It looks like it's in the 1920s, doesn't it? So you're like, what is going on here? What is going on here? And then he says at the bar, like, he's trying to give Lloyd money, and Lloyd is like, your money's no good here. And he's like, I want to know who's paying for my drinks. And it's all like very trippy.
Was that sense also that he's already sold his soul?
Yeah, 100%. Like, so it's a great scene. And then Grady in the toilet, when they're clearing off his jacket, they start talking. Grady says, do you know your son is trying to get outside forces here? Can I say the word or should I bleep it out?
I mean, I wouldn't. He drops an N-bomb, basically.
He drops an N-bomb and he's referring to Scatman Crothers. And Jack's saying, I didn't know about any of this. But then Grady's like, your son's being very naughty if I'm not overstepping the mark. And so is your what? And he's blaming his wife, saying it's all her. She's all like making him do this
They
or
should
that.
have a talking.
Yeah.
Perhaps more than that.
Perhaps more than that, insinuating murder them.
My girls, sir, they didn't care for the Overlook at first. One of them actually stole a pack of matches and tried to burn it down. But I corrected them, sir. And when my wife tried to prevent me from doing my duty, I corrected her.
Do you know what's so incredible about his performance, though, is it's quite a long scene. It's like maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes. He starts off incredibly Jeeves-like, jovial, servant, very polite, very personable, but very polite at the same time in that servant in the 20s sort of way. But at a certain point, you can't quite pinpoint when it happens. He gradually shifts into this menacing creep. And he goes from really welcoming to incredibly intimidating and sinister. You can't really place when it happens as you're watching it because it's so gradual, but it's fucking perfect.
Mr. Grady's really got into Jack's head, and from this exchange, I think more or less he decides, I'm going to murder him, doesn't he?
And this is the big moment where Wendy comes across what he's been writing this whole time. And it's such a great moment because it's one thing, if you find one page of it saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, you might think, he was bored fucking around.
Yeah.
As she goes through every page, you realise as well as she does that, he's cracked up more than you realise a long time before this, because anytime you've seen him typing, that's all he's been typing throughout the whole film.
And obviously he comes back, fronts Wendy, and this is where your point is valid about him taking the hotel more than his family's pastoral care, because Danny's becoming increasingly unwell. Wendy wants to get him out of the hotel because Wendy's clocked that it's turning them insane, so she's trying to get him out. She's seeing the Overlook as the evil entity that it is, but Jack can't see it, and he's saying,
ever thought about my responsibilities?
Oh, Dick, what are you talking about?
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers?
It's that menacing scene you were talking about earlier when
it's the Mel Gibson, right?
When he's advancing up the stairs.
Yeah.
She's swinging
it's
the back.
So beautifully staged and set up, because you got Wendy's first reading it, and then the camera slowly dollies past the photo frames on the wall, and then Jack steps into frame, and that's when he speaks and freaks her out. And then, like you said, he's just sort of chasing her up the stairs, but such a slow pace. And he's getting more and more angry, and he's slapping his hands together, and the delivery of the lines are just so enigmatic. And then she knocks him out at the top of the stairs, and he falls down.
Knocks him out, drags him into the fridge, locks him in. And this is where it's like my favourite shot, where he's like down and it's just his face like kind of like drooling, like he's rabid, like he's got rabies, saying, "Oh, you've really hurt me, let me out, let me out." And all the while this is happening, Danny is having like an epileptic, shining, thick,
transmitting, dribbling to Scatman Crothers.
Scatman Crothers. And bless him, Scatman Crothers is in like hot California. He keeps calling up the fire brigade saying, "Hey," like they're trying to get through to him on the radio. Unbeknownst to them, he's already fucked up the radio and ruined it. Cutting back to Scatman Crothers' slow journey in the snow, trying to get to the Overlook Hotel.
Very simple, isn't it? But there's something about it's like building that sense of impending doom.
He's trying to get there. Jack's stuck in the fridge. Wendy and Danny are barricaded in.
Well, the reason they're barricaded in is because she speaks to him through the door after she's locked him in the storage room. He's trying, you know, like you said, he's trying different angles. He's like, "Oh, you hurt me bad. Or, oh, forget about it all. Just let me out." And then when she's like, "I'm going to go radio in and get the plow and drive out of here," and he starts going,
"You've got a big surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere. Go check out the snowcat in the radio and you'll see what I mean. Go check it out."
"You got a surprise coming to you."
Yeah.
And he's like going like that at the door. And then she runs out and finds that he's already sabotaged everything.
The plough's gone. By this point, snowed in, Declan, so they can't escape. When all this is happening, the spirit entities, including Mr. Grady, open the fridge and get into the storage room or wherever he is and basically tell him off and basically say, "Well, we've gathered together and we've all come to the conclusion that you're not up to the job of murdering your family." To which he says, "Come on, Mr. Grady, give me one more chance." And then they release him. And this is where we see the famous running around with the axe. Wendy's asleep in the room. Danny's just milling about, just going, "Red rum, red rum." And then Wendy's asleep and she wakes up like, what the fuck is going on? And he's taken her lipstick, red lipstick, and written red rum. And then we're like, what the fuck is this little kid doing? And then it's a beautiful, beautiful shot where it just perfectly, the mirrors align. So you got one mirror there, one mirror there. And you can see from the reflection, red rum backwards is murder.
I always thought that bit was stupid. I'm not gonna lie.
But I like the shot though.
The shot's great, but just the whole thing of like it spells murder back. I was just always a bit like, but it's the fact that it precedes the Jack Torrance trying to come through the door with an axe, where you're like, oh shit.
So Tony is essentially pre-warning them that he's coming, isn't he?
But how about pre-warn? Just say your dad's coming to kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
What's with the like? You've been speaking clearly the whole rest of the time, Tony.
I don't know. He's just showing off at this point. It's Tony. Anyway, and then we get the famous "Here's Johnny" scene, don't we? Where he breaks through the door with the axe.
The way they film, they pan with the axe as he swings it back and forth, gets it stuck, breaks it out, and swings it back again. And it's a great way of delivering like the physicality of him smashing his way through this door.
And you see his headlights, so like a little cat flap. His head just goes in the middle and goes, "Here's Johnny."
Again, controversially, one of the few parts of the film I don't like.
Oh, really?
It's just, do you know what it is? It's just kind of dumb.
And who's Johnny anyway?
It was Johnny Carson. I think he had the Tonight Show. He had some nightly show in America at the time, and it was something he'd say at the start of it.
Was it ad-libbed?
It'd be like saying, "What's up, Doc?" or just some other iconic line as you come through a door.
Scatman Crothers is now turned up, managed to get his way into the hotel. It's a bit idiotic, to be honest, Declan, because he has the shine in himself. You said in the book he's had several flashbacks of terrible stuff that happened there. So if I made it to the hotel, I wouldn't be announcing that I'm there by going, "Is anyone here?"
But to be fair, who is he in fear of? Is he's not necessarily assuming he's in fear of the people in the hotel. He's assuming they're in danger. Danny has transmitted his shine message across thousands of miles.
Yeah.
We don't know what level of detail that came in. It could have just been a general feeling of they're in trouble. And also, it kind of alludes to the fact that Danny is a particularly powerful shiner. Scatman Crothers might be a fairly weak shiner and not be able to sense the danger he's walking into.
I wish he could have transmitted like a level of detail that my dad's gone mental and trying to murder
just
us.
the entire film up till that point.
Yeah, basically.
Like, here's what's happening.
Anyway, so he comes in, like, and the Simpsons got it, like, bang on when they done their shining thing. Like, Willie's trying to save him, and as soon as he just turns up, bang, axe in the back. Like, he doesn't actually do anything.
No.
Like,
poor Scatman.
He's
Crothers.
gone all the way across the elements. He just gets murdered straight away. Like, literally got, like, one of the last flights that takes off, managed to sort out a hire car, and sadly he just gets killed.
Found a plough from somewhere the way to get up and gets axed right in the chest. It's obviously one of those effects where they show him swinging the axe, then it's a prosthetic fake axe embedded in his chest. But the way it's whacked in there, I always looked at that when I was a kid when I first watched it and thought, that must fucking hurt.
Kills him straight away. He's dead in a pool of blood. Obviously, Danny and Scatman Crothers have a connection through The Shining, so it cuts to him beautifully of like spazzing out big time.
You sense he nearly even feels the pain of it when he first gets hit, because he screams and gives away his position, and old Jack starts following him going, "Danny boy!"
Yeah. Then we follows Danny all the way into the maze, and it's a really great scene where he's chasing him around.
Danny! I'm coming! I'm coming, Dad!
Danny and Wendy manage Declan to escape and get into whatever that car's called that they love. Like, we need
Big old plough thing.
Big old plough thing.
Mr. Plough.
We don't actually see them kind of escape, do we?
No, you do.
Oh, you do. You see him.
You see him driving off.
You see him drive off. And
you don't see him drinking coffee in the police station, but you see him leaving.
Yeah, you assume that they've got away from the Overlook Hotel, which is great. And then you're kind of like wondering as the audience, what's happened to Jackie boy? And then it's a really great shot of him just in the middle of the maze, just like frozen with icicles.
Frozen in the maze, and then also in a sense frozen in time, because in the final shot we drift off through the Overlook into a close-up of one of the photo frames that was seemingly sitting there the entire time as the whole movie's been playing out, but never been noticed, that in a picture taken from the 4th of July party in 1921, Jack Torrance, or at least a doppelganger of Jack Torrance, is right front and centre in the photo. And it plays back into that idea of, has he in some way been doomed to return to this site again and again? Is he the spirit of a Native American that keeps reincarnating and coming back to this site? Or has he only ever been there twice and he's somehow been back there in 1921 and doomed to return it, just as Mr. Grady says to him in the toilets that he's always been here? Or is it the fact that he's been frozen in time, but his spirit's been captured and frozen in time into the whole doomed to repeat itself on whatever poor person comes back to the hotel in the future? You know, because Native Americans, in the background at least, feature quite a lot in the story. You know, it's built on a Native American burial ground. You'd assume maybe that is partly what is causing the haunting. And in a lot of cultures and Native American culture, the idea of the photograph is a spiritual negative. You know, the idea of having your photo taken was seen as capturing someone's soul. So you wonder, is the fact that he's now appearing magically in one of these photos is the idea that his soul's been captured, and maybe everyone in those photo frames are in fact captured souls that have been eternal prisoners and victims of the hotel for the rest of time.
My take on it is, he's gone, he's got frozen, and by being frozen and dying, Declan, at the Overlook Hotel, his soul, as you said, is transported in, and his fate now is to continually haunt the Overlook as a restless spirit, like all the other ones we've seen. Going to continue, so he'll haunt the next caretaker that they choose to pick.
Anything you didn't like about the film?
You know what? I struggle to criticise this film. I feel like maybe they could have added a little bit for people that haven't read the book, especially around those malevolent spirits. If you didn't tell me about those elements of the book, then I would never have known, and the film serves a purpose anyway, so I'm not going to use that as a criticism. Anything I didn't like about the film, I'm struggling. It's a very, very perfect film, hard to critique in my
I do agree with you there, in the sense that what makes Stephen King so amazing, his best skill among the many skills he has as a writer, his imagination for making something paranormal seem possible or seem tangible, or even seem like there's some sort of possible explainable physics or science behind it or mechanics behind it. The level of detail that is in the novel of The Shining about this universe, I do wish Kubrick had found a way to dip more of it, because it's so rich. And it's funny because on paper you think if you're going to make a sequel to the book and film, you wouldn't imagine you're going to make more of an adventure action orientated film, which is what Dr. Sleep is really. But it does make sense when you're trying to expand the amazing universe that The Shining sort of gives a peek into. So for that reason it kind of makes sense, even though I'm not a fan of sequel movie.
Definitely one of Kubrick's best films. 100% agree with you that it's the best Stephen King adaptation so far. He's got a very, very big body of work. Mostly all of his books are adaptable to the screen. They're that good. So you never know. We might see someone to surpass it. I doubt it. Fantastic cinematography. Fantastic choice of shots throughout the film. We've picked up on the main ones, but there's probably more. Fantastic building of atmosphere, fantastic sets, the overlook, the maze, everything fantastic. Is my sum up of The Shining, really.
It might be the greatest horror film of all time, but even if it doesn't scare you, because horror films can be quite hit and miss. One film that might terrify someone might just make another person laugh. But even if you're not scared by it at all, this is just simply one of the greatest films ever made. It's so perfect, so easy to come back and watch again, so full of incredible performances. Jack Nicholson's, in my opinion, greatest film, greatest performance ever, and just a fucking electric, incredible film that grabs you by the balls and doesn't let go of them. Impossible to forget. It's probably been held in such high regard, and the fact that it's a Kubrick film, probably nearly been forgotten and doesn't get enough love nowadays. Just an exceptional film. So easy recommendation for The Shining.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?